What up? I'm Josh Paulson, a professional game programmer at Defiance Game Studio, and I guess it makes me smile when I say that because I think it's pretty cool. So what does a day in the life of a game programmer look like? And I'll say more specifically, myself. And there are a few things that are worth noting about my specific work situation. Number one, I work for an indie studio. That means that the team is smaller. We've got, oh man, I'm gonna get the number wrong, 7, 9, we're somewhere around there. It's a small studio, that's one thing to note. We are a mixture of in-person and remote. This is going to be very different from, say, a AAA programmer's experience with an in-house office day-to-day. So that's just one thing that I really want to throw out there, is that this has to be specific to my experience because that's the experience I've got. I guess I'll go through a basic schedule of the day, and it is going to not sound exciting because it's a job and there's a lot of just normal stuff. So we start off with the stand-up. What we do is that we'll talk about what we did on the previous day or last week if it's a Monday. And so we'll share some brief updates, we will fill each other in, we will let each other know if we have any blockers, basically things that are keeping us from doing our jobs. So our stand-ups will go anywhere from, we've joked that they would be 20 minutes, but they haven't been 20 minutes. They can be 30 minutes to 45 minutes to an hour. It really depends. Depends on if there's any corporate news to talk about. It depends on how off track we go, which I feel like is actually the bigger determinant of that. And then let's say that this is a time when I don't have any tasks. What I'll do is I'll go to Jira. Now Jira is a task management tool and it's used by most AAA game companies and probably most not AAA game companies as well. Basically just lets you track your tasks. It lets you organize your tasks into periods of time called sprints, or there's different terms depending on what methodology you're using. And so I'll go there, I'll look at the tasks that are assigned to me and I will pick one. Usually I'll pick one based on if other things require it first. So I'll first look at, okay, are there other things dependent on this? And I'll pick the one that has the most other tasks dependent on it. And in some cases, it's just sort of what I feel like doing that day. Maybe I'm like, you know what? I just want to get into some deep coding stuff and jump into that. Sometimes I might need a warm-up, so I'll just start with something simple so that I can knock a task off really quickly. We don't have many simple tasks at the moment. Most of them are complex, so there's not as much flexibility in that way. What I'll do then, once I've picked a task, is that I will open up Visual Studio, which is what we use to code in, and I will open up Unity and open up Archmage Rises in Unity. I also always have a browser tab open somewhere. You're always using Google. You're always looking for whether that's, hey, I don't know if there is some sort of tool that lets me do this, if there's a function that I can call in my code, if there are certain variables or attributes that I've overlooked. You generally are doing a lot of Googling. And so I will have all that up and ready. I'll start playing some music. Usually I like listening to video game soundtracks on loop for 5 hours. And so the first thing that I do when I'm looking at a problem and I want to solve it is I try to make sure that I understand the problem. If you don't understand the problem, you can't solve the problem. So that might sound kind of obvious, but it's very easy to just be like, oh, you want, say, a learning system. Okay, I'm just going to start writing code that has something to do with learning. Okay, well, I need to look at the design documents. We've got a bunch of design documents in a tool called Confluence, which is connected to Jira. Atlassian owns them both. So Confluence stores all of our documentation. It stores all of our design documents. Confluence is great. I love Confluence. I'll go to the design documents on Confluence and take a look around at those, make sure that I understand the problem. Then there are one of two things I'll do. If it is something where I am familiar with all of the pieces and I have no doubt in my mind kind of what's required, I'll create a UML chart, which this is a controversial thing because for some people it's like, you don't need that. For some people it's like, you have to do that. We go with kind of a rough approach where you do it, but you're not married to it. So the idea is to help you foresee any problems that you could run into, but we also recognize you're gonna run into problems no matter what kind of planning you do. And also you might come up with a way better way of doing things as you start coding, and that's okay as well. We don't like go back and forth between coding and the UML charts all the time. I will create a UML chart, I'll write code that has some of those parameters and such and that follows that outline, and then I'll solve it from there. And that might require changing a bunch of stuff, but it gives me a starting point. Then what I will do is I'll start solving the individual pieces of the puzzle. So I might know that, hey, I need to have a way to get all of the spells in the game from a particular spell school. Okay, I'm going to make a function that allows me to get that data, or I'll just put some sort of loop or something in my code somewhere to solve that problem for me. You don't always need a separate function, but sometimes that's nice. and I'll just start building up the logic. Now, I said that that's how I will start if I already know the shape of the problem well. If it's something that I'm familiar with, I've done before, done similar before. Let's say that I have no idea. So a great example of that is the recording tool that I did recently. With the recording tool, where I would record screen footage and then I would send it with bug reports, there were a few problems. Number one, I had never used this screen recording tool before, so I didn't know how it worked. Another one was I had never used Jira's API before. I've worked with other APIs, and an API, by the way, it's basically a way to connect to a service, so lets you do things via code. So by writing code, I can end up sending bug reports to Jira, for example. So anyway, I hadn't used Jira's API, I hadn't used that tool. Making a UML chart would have been pretty much a fool's errand. And so I did not start with a UML chart. I started with prototyping. I started by just frankly writing code. And so this is where, hey, the less you know about a problem, sometimes the more that planning is actually not helpful because you need to do some prototyping. And the purpose of prototyping, as my boss put it, which I think helps me a lot, is that it's to answer questions. In my case, it was, how does Jira's API work? What are the limitations of the recording tool? What are the limitations of Jira's API? Is the best way to solve this even pinging Jira's API? And by prototyping, I was able to discover the limitations of the video recording software. I was able to find out about some bugs and some gotchas that it had. I was able to figure out some gotchas and tricks with Jira's API and looking at the sizes of files that we could upload there reasonably. And so I was able to answer a lot of questions. If I'd started with a UML chart before I even knew how those worked, it would have been awful. It would have been terrible. I would have thrown everything out. And so that would have been pretty much useless, frankly. And so what I ended up doing was that after I had prototyped, I ended up creating a UML chart to just be like, okay, here's how I want to organize the code now. And then I reorganized it. And so to me, UML is an organizational process. It's not a, these are the rules and you have to follow them or else you're a bad person process. My impression is that for some people, it's very much you have to go back and make everything line up. And it's more so a guideline. It's not, for me, it's not a, this is the absolute rule. It's that this is to help me brainstorm. And if I throw it out later, that's fine. It's a tool. It's not the law. But it can be helpful for me for processing through certain problems or aspects of problems. So if I finish a task, depending on the task, I will make a pull request. So a pull request is a way to tell the other programmers on the team, hey, I did something, but I want you to see if I did pretty well or if there's anything that you're noticing that you're like, ah. Now, a pull request, it might sound like a junior thing. It's not really. It's for everyone. It's a way for people to check each other's code to see if their systems are lining up together. You can also learn things by doing pull requests, by seeing what other people are doing and being like, oh, that's a cool concept. Or you can give input, or hey, you know what, well, this system works this way. If you do this, and it will be a bit cleaner. And so it helps everyone get on the same page. Now, depending on what you're specifically doing, we don't care about doing pull requests for every single thing because it doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it's like, hey, I fixed a typo. Do you need to do a pull request for that? Unless you have terrible spelling, I would be fine with you just merging that in, and the rest of us on the team would be too. What do I mean when I say merge in? So the way that good coding setups work is that you actually don't work on the same code at the same time. You work on separate copies of the code. We have software that helps us all merge different code changes together called Git. Git is very popular in software. It's not used as often in game development, but it's still popular for game development. There's Plastic SCM. And then there's another piece of software that I keep forgetting the name of and it's driving me nuts, but that you can also use in order to track version changes. And so what we'll do with this software, and we use it all the time, it's just part of the workflow, is that we will create what are called separate branches. And so basically, you have your version of the code you're working on, and I have my version. And if I make changes over here, you don't even see them. But what we can do is that we can have a shared branch, kind of a spot between us, where when we finish something, we can merge our changes back in. It allows people to work on different problems simultaneously, not worry about overwriting each other's work. It even works with individual files, so where me and someone else could be working in the same file and we could merge our changes together. There are fixes for when things go wrong, because things will go wrong, but it works really well and it's been really nice for us. So running back through the list, at this point, I chose a task, I researched the task, maybe I prototyped it, I wrote up some UML, I wrote the code, I merged it in, now what? I do it again. And again, these tasks can last for multiple days or multiple weeks. That's the general flow of my day, but it can vary. For example, we have a 2 p.m. meeting where I'll talk a little bit together and we call it tea time. And part of that's for one of our coworkers who is a Kiwi in New Zealand, and so we'll be talking with him there. Sometimes we have impromptu meetings to talk about code problems or to help each other process through something that they're working on. One of the things recently is that our composer, James, has been posting different examples of music and being like, hey, what do you all think of this? Does this seem like it's hitting the tone that you're looking for? So we'll listen to that. We'll have design meetings around different features and be like, hey, is this feeling right? Is this hitting the target? Hey, I have these concerns. If you're thinking that it is 100% design meetings or that that's a majority of it, that is not correct. And in fact, if you have design meetings all day, you're not getting work done, and design meetings all day is a bad thing. Maybe if you're a lead designer, that's great. But if you're a programmer, that's a bad thing. If that is your every day. I don't know if you have any specific questions or, hey, you didn't really go into this. Could you explain how this would work? Feel free to ask. I like comments because they make me feel special. And I hope that me answering your questions or your comments makes you feel special too. I stream on Twitch, I play games, and I talk about them. You should subscribe and stuff. That's my moral obligation as a YouTuber to command you to do, because how dare I not? Because the numbers are everything, and that's the meaning of my life. It's definitely not to provide value, it's just to increase numbers and see them tick up and feel special. I guess, have a fantastic day? Yeah, I'll say that. Have a fantastic day. Okay, confession time. I wasn't dressed like this all day. Usually I'm pretty sloppy at work. A lot of times I'm in my pajamas because I'm doing remote recently. When I was living with my boss, I also wore my pajamas to work a fair amount. He didn't mind. Oh yeah, I lived with my boss for a while, for like 6 months. If that would be an interesting video to you, let me know. Goodbye.